All right. Good morning, guys. Today's recording is for June 19th, and we're in the book of Daniel, chapters 5 through 8. And where I thought I would be able to catch up, I had another injury, so now I am continually falling behind. But the book of Daniel, I have to say, is becoming one of my favorites. And it's just because as I go through it, it's almost like what stands out most to me about Daniel is really his character. And so we see in chapter 5, we have like a new king. We no longer have King Nebuchadnezzar, but now we have King Belshazzar. And it's like he does something so obscene. Like he goes and he gets the cups, the gold and silver cups that was taken from the temple in Jerusalem, and he actually has it for his guests, and they drink from them and they praise their gods and their idols. And then it was like they saw a finger of a human hand writing on the wall. And so, of course, he got very scared. And so now he's calling everybody. Like, can somebody come and read this? And of course, nobody understood it, right? But luckily, there was somebody who kind of took the time out to get to know all of the leaders that was still in place and in the kingdom, which was the queen. And the queen was, and this is what I like, right? It was how she described Daniel, because she knew he was somebody that would be able to help the king at this time. But she described him as a man that was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. And that he had the ability and is filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. She said, call for Daniel and he will tell you what the writing means, right? And so that was one of the things that really stood out because, again, like Daniel's character was the first thing that somebody thought about when a problem arose. So I guess since he had taken over as king, Daniel wasn't even a thought. But it's going to come back to what Daniel was doing during that time in the later chapters, right? Because Daniel was still being Daniel. Gotta love him, right? And so basically, when Daniel came before the king, again he said that I have heard about you, that you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom, right? And so he promised Daniel like his reward if he could go ahead and he could say what it meant. And so basically Daniel was like, you can keep your gifts, that doesn't interest me. But he went ahead and he let him know, like, he was like, the Most High God gave sovereignty, majesty, and glory to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. And he spoke about the time when Nebuchadnezzar was like an animal for 7 years. And he was like to the king, but you knew that. So it was one of those things, the same way the wife knew about Daniel, so did Belshazzar. And it was like if he knew about Daniel, then he knew about Nebuchadnezzar and he knew about what he inherited, but he should also knew that it was God that gave Nebuchadnezzar everything that he had, not the idols, not the gods that he served, but a God that sat on high. And he said basically that Nebuchadnezzar had learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdom of the world and appointed anyone he desires to rule all of this. He said, you knew all of this, yet you have not humbled yourself. So this was one of those things where it was almost like not just not humbling yourself, but to go to the complete opposite and to the complete extreme of dishonoring God. It was one of those things that, now you're going to have to pay for it. And he said, all you have not honored God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So, and it was crazy because when Daniel had to give Nebuchadnezzar bad news, it was one of those things where it kind of frightened him. But it was like now when he had to come and speak to Belshazzar, it was one of those things where it doesn't mention that. So it's almost like in his time and his understanding of the fact that God was going to do whatever he said he was going to do, that he just had to be a bold messenger and deliver the message. He did this boldly. And he said, you know, basically, God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end, right? And your kingdom has been divided. So Belshazzar went ahead and he gave Daniel what was promised to him, and that very night he passed, right? So now we get the next one, King Darius, right? And it's funny because it opens up where it says that King Darius, because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans and placed him over the entire empire. So the bottom line is all of the information about Daniel was made available. So the next king that came in, he made it, um, he took advantage of what was made available to him and he placed Daniel in a very high place. And so because Daniel was put in that high place, it immediately caused problems with the other administrators because Daniel got placed over them. And these were other men that had high offices, right? So now they had to come up with a plan to try to go and get Daniel. And it was one of those things like they didn't read the books either, I guess. So it was about to learn, right? And so one of the things, again, when it comes to Daniel's character, it said they couldn't find anything to criticize and condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. I'm talking about if you ever want people to have something to say about you on your resume, and these were his haters that said that. So you can imagine the people who like praised him. This was his haters who was basically saying these great things about Daniel because it was one of those things where Daniel stood on his business about his work, right? And so they came up with the plan. And basically this was where we get one of our greatest story, which is Daniel in the lion's den. And basically, it was like that they put something in where the only person that would, the king was the only one to be bowed down and to pray to. And of course, if they already knew what time to find Daniel praying, because Daniel stuck with his routine, and it wasn't so much a routine. And it was one of those things where as soon as he learned of the Lord Daniel, he went home and he knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with his window open. So it was one of those things that even though he was doing something that was against the law, it was one of those things where he was willing to break the law to continue to honor God because he knew who ultimately was in control. But the thing was that he wasn't just having a regular prayer like routine, oh, this is what I'm doing. It says that he was actually praying and asking for God's help. So it was like he saw, like he knew that the situation was serious and it was one that he should be concerned about, but he already knew where to go to get his help and who would answer him. It wasn't for him to try to go to King Darius and have a conversation, to try to go to the administrators and have a conversation. No, he went straight to God. He got down on his knees, and as he faithfully did. And so now they ran immediately and they told on Daniel, right? They went real quick, right? But then they just said Daniel, one of the captives from Judah. So the fact that Daniel is now this high ranking official, it was like, oh, let me remind you who he really is. He's one of them, one of those people that got brought here as a captive. So it was like that reminder, like somebody who wasn't supposed to have any rights that you now have ruling above everybody else is now defying your order and you have to act on it because it was something that you signed. And so now we see that this deeply troubled the king, right? Because the king, he knew who Daniel was. He knew who Daniel was to the extent that he placed him in this high position And one of the things that I liked about that was that it showed that that king that night that he stayed up and he fasted. So it was one of those things where you could see Daniel like walking in his way, but then other people actually seeing things that he did and he kept like at the forefront. So now when people were like out there on his behalf, it was one of those things where they went to the things that they knew that Daniel did to help him. It wasn't like the king was out there trying to recreate anything. It was like he stuck to his word, but then he knew that, like, there was something that he could do in his power in this situation. And that was pretty much go to the God, right? That Daniel served, right? And so after that, the next morning they went and he called out Daniel, and he called Daniel, servant of the living God. Was your God, whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions? I want a friend like that. I want a friend who, even though it's almost like they had to go out for justice, to come to look for me in the place where they dropped me and call me servant of the living God and ask me, was my God, whom I serve faithfully, able to rescue me from the lions? And Daniel answered, long live the king. He said, my God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. Come on, somebody. I want to be able to say that. I want that life where it's one of those things where you're just minding your business. And because you proclaim who you serve and you get favor based on your faithfulness, because as we're going to keep going in the next couple of chapters, it's like, Daniel was about his father, but he was also about the king's business because that's what he was appointed to do. So he was somebody out there faithfully serving in a position that he was given, not one that he sought, not one that he even cared for, but it was something that was bestowed upon him. And since it was, he had the desire to work it out in such a great way. And again, this is all character. This is all character, right? And so it was one of those things, of course, the guys who was quick to want to have Daniel going into this lion's den now became them and their families now became that lion's meal, right? Which was fitting because it's one of those things when it's almost like when you're standing on the word of God and that's all you have, it's enough. And it's going to have to be enough to push you forward. And it's not even that you're looking for anything bad to happen for people that come against you because, we're in a place of grace. And it's like if somebody is coming against you, I'll be looking at them like, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, right? But it's one of those things when people continually act in a certain manner, it's like consequences come and they got their consequence swiftly and immediately, right? And so after this, it goes back to like Daniel when he was under Belshazzar, and it just talks about the visions and it talks about the things that was going to come because one of his visions I'm not even really gonna go into the visions too much, but it was like talking about like the holy people, the Most High will be given the kingdom and they will rule forever and forever. And then it was showing how one particular kingdom would rise up and wage war against God's holy people and was actually defeating them. And it said he will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people of the Most High. He will try to change their sacred festivals and laws, and they will be placed under his control for a time and a time and a half, right? And that was the end of his vision. And this right here terrified Daniel. And he said, but that was something that he kept to himself. So it's one of those things where God will give you something, but it's almost like you have to have discernment and wisdom. Like, if it scared him to his core and he didn't have an answer or anything to add to it, because you never want to add to it. You never want to take away. You want to be able to give it the way God gave it to you. But it was like he had to use discernment and wisdom. So we see that it was something that he recorded, but that was it. It wasn't like he tried to go and explain it or anything like you see before when God was given visions, like in Ezekiel, it was like, no, go tell them, pay attention. You got to tell them and let them know. But that wasn't the case with Daniel. God was just giving him something that was the time to come. And so we see the same thing that happens in the next chapter. And we see that even though in the next chapter he had other visions, and it's like Gabriel explained it to him, right? That this is about a time that will come to the end. And it was one of those things where even though Gabriel came, and it was like the presence of Gabriel was something that terrified Daniel, and he fell with his face to the ground. And Gabriel said, you must understand that the events you have seen in your visions relate to the time of the end. It's one of those things where Daniel had gotten to a place where where it's one of those things like you never get used to being in that kind of presence. So it was one of those things he never lost the respect, he never lost the awe. And it was like he was given something so great, but then God sent him help to help him with it. But at the very end, he said that he was overcame and he laid sick for several days. He said, afterward, I got up and performed my duties for the king, but I was greatly troubled by the vision and could not understand it. So it's one of those things like you don't have to understand everything at that moment, but it's like you have to trust God with whatever He gives you. And if for Daniel, he recorded it because a lot of the things that Daniel recorded is like we get to witness unfold, and some people after him got a chance to witness it unfold. And people after me are going to be witnessing this unfold. It was just important that it was recorded to show how God actually has relationships with his people. But the main thing here is that the character of Daniel is something that I'm just stuck on, like for these last couple of chapters. So I hope y'all are enjoying the book of Daniel, reading it, rocking it out. And I want to say that I want to catch up, but it looked like it's going to be a time to have. So look forward to speaking with you guys later. Have a blessed day.